Number 5. A bioweapon disaster. Baba Vanga has been called the Nostradamus of the Balkans, and if you're a fan of this channel, presumably you've heard a lot about Baba Vanga. When she was a girl, a sandstorm blinded her. However, when a door closes, God opens a window, and although she lost her sight, she was given a second sight, an ability to allegedly see into the future. And over the years, she's made quite a name for herself, making several predictions. Now, any old hack can predict stuff, but it takes a real prophet to land the nail on the head. One of Baba Vanga's more concerning predictions, to say the least, is that in the near immediate future, there's going to be a bioweapon disaster carried out by a large nation. Now, of course, in classic Baba Vanga tradition, she was just cryptic enough to not mention which country's doing this. As well, it's hard to say what exactly she meant by a bioweapon, but that's why we love you, Baba Vanga. We love vague mysticisms over here. Some sort of gas weapon or a virus? Now, the United Nations, of course, bans the development and production of any biological weapons, but, you know, if you think all the countries follow everything the United Nations does all the time, I've got a bridge I'd love to sell you. Anyway, if she was predicting accurately, this would have huge ramifications, not just for public safety, but also global politics. If it was a virus she's referring to, Vanga did make another prediction similarly in 2022 that a new virus would be uncovered and spread rapidly across the globe, as if we really need to do that one again. We just recently uncovered 33 new viruses in Siberia, and if you can wait just a couple minutes, you'll hear a lot more about that. Now, could there possibly be a connection between these retroviruses and her prediction of a bioweapon? I mean, of course there could be, but there could also not be. For all of our sakes, we sincerely hope maybe Baba Vanga was getting this one wrong. She's not right all the time. She predicted by 2017 that Europe would cease to exist, and as of this video, December 30th, 2022, Europe currently still exists. Can we get someone to check in on that just to make 100% sure? She also predicted that Barack Obama, the 44th president, would be the final president the United States ever saw. And unless she was making a complicated political commentary, there have been 2 more presidents since then, and there probably will be a few more afterwards. So she's not always right. But if you want a prediction that is right on the money 100% of the time, I predict that if you click through on Top 5 Scary, you're gonna find a video you like, you'll subscribe, and you'll get fresh scary content every single day. And I've got a feeling that I'm right.
I know that psychics are fake because one told me I'd find love. Number 4, yet another supervirus. Athos Salome is a self-proclaimed parapsychologist and psychic who has been called the Nostradamus of Brazil. Seems like every country has one. And every year, he makes a point of releasing his predictions for the year ahead. Whether his predictions are simply guesses, or if he really does have some kind of psychic gift, is really not for me to say. But what I will say is that he has a relatively impressive track record. Salome was apparently able to predict a variety of things that happened in the last few years, such as the virus that has been taking the world by storm, the current situation in the Ukraine, the death of Queen Elizabeth II, and the results of the recent World Cup in Qatar. If this is true, and Athos really has been capable of predicting major world events, I really hope his predictions for the year ahead prove untrue. In his 2023 prediction report, he states that the world will have to deal with yet another bug that could cause serious harm to the population. As he puts it, it will sweep the world, and the fight against this new virus will take longer than one can imagine. If this new virus goes unchecked, suffering, mental and material damage will proliferate death, and this virus will be known as the greatest Grim Reaper in history. Athos claims that the origin of this sickness will be a result of melting ice in Antarctica. Whether his prediction for this year is true or not, this particular theory does have some scientific plausibility. Scientists have been saying for years that as the polar ice caps melt, viruses and bacteria that have been frozen in the ice for thousands of years could be released onto the world. We got a taste of this in 2016 when 8 people in Siberia were infected with anthrax after an infected reindeer carcass that had been frozen in the permafrost was thawed out due to a heat wave. Scientists have studied ice samples taken from the Tibetan Plateau and apparently discovered 33 previously unknown viruses that have been frozen away for about 15,000 years. Hopefully, Athos is mistaken, and this won't be the year where a previously unknown virus thaws out from the ice and drives the world into pandemonium once again.
Number 3, Leave that in the video, please. And number 3, a shift in Earth's orbit. You know, there's a lot of really good things to like about the Earth. Lush fields, flowing water, the Fast and Furious franchise, and it orbits exactly where it should. It's a fantastic trait of our big blue marble. Well, Baba Vanga, always in my mind and always in my heart, made another worrying prediction about the state of the Earth in the near future, where she predicted that somehow, someway, something is going to knock Earth off of its orbit. Now, I feel like I don't need to explain too much why something knocking Earth off of its orbit would be pretty bad, mostly because I'm not a scientist, I don't really know the big details. Everything we're doing on this planet works the way it does, due in no small part to everything fitting in just the right place. But let's get into it for just a second. If Earth was somehow thrown off by its orbit by some incomprehensible cosmic Galactus level force, it would wreak incalculable havoc. Countries would be thrown into cycles of month-long days or nights, which might sound nice at first, Imagine you had the most beautiful day of the year lasting 3 months. Except then you think of the damage it would cause. Unending daylight would lead to mass sleep deprivation, global anxiety, and it's not to mention what it would do to our flora, fauna, and wildlife. Crops would be ravaged, burnt, leading to a global famine. As well, unending days would lead to temperatures doubling, melting the ice caps even worse than they already are, rising sea levels and flooding coastal cities. We're not even talking about the parts of the globe that would be sent into like a long, long night. Could you imagine a 3-month-long night? For immediate starters, that would mean vampires and cats, I guess, would be the only ones thriving. Huge for the Fang community. Interestingly though, this actually is a recognized phenomenon called a polar night. And it's a town in Norway that actually experiences something like this in Tromsø. The sun doesn't rise from November to January, and paradoxically, they don't seem to experience seasonal affective disorder at all and seem pretty fine with it. So add Norwegians alongside vampires and cats as the folks who would be fine with this. Sadly, as I am not one of those 3 groups, I probably would have an issue with it. So I'm gonna hope, just for my own sake, that this is another prediction of Baba's that isn't quite on the money.
Number 2, solar storms. With all the rather dire predictions made by Baba Vanga for the upcoming year, it could be tempting to call her a pessimist. One of her more devastating predictions for the year ahead is that we will experience what is known as a solar storm. A solar storm refers to phenomena taking place on the surface of the sun, such as coronal mass ejections or solar flares. If one of these coronal mass ejections were to reach Earth, it would cause a geomagnetic storm. This kind of storm has happened before on Earth in 1859, in what has since been called the Carrington event, due to the work of astronomer Richard Carrington. It resulted in telegraph networks being knocked out, as well as people using electronics being electrocuted, and even some pretty nasty fires. But it would be much worse if it happened today. Imagine, if you will, a world where all of the technology you take for granted was suddenly fried and unusable. Suddenly, internet access and records would be lost. Communication systems that we have come to rely on, keep our world running, would become useless blocks of dead machinery. A world of darkness where chaos reigns, and the financial markets are suddenly put into a dramatic tailspin that we could not even begin to reverse the effects of for years. Think of the chaos that took place relatively recently in Texas when the power grid went down, and imagine what would happen if that took place all over the world. Considering the disastrous global consequences of one of these severe solar storms, let us hope that Baba Vanga is incorrect in her prediction that this will happen in the upcoming year.
I'm sick of hearing about Baba Vanga. I'd like to hear somebody else prophesizing some doomsday. Maybe Nostradamus, he's a pretty good one. Nostradamus wrote hundreds upon hundreds of predictions, and for years after the fact, scholars and experts have been trying their darndest to decipher what he meant by them, because like all the great psychics of the world out there, he only wrote in vague mysticisms. So let's hear what Mr. Michel de Nostradamus had to say. Take a listen. The moon in full of night over the high mountain. The new sage with a lone brain sees it. By his disciples invited to be immortal. Eyes to the south, hands in bosoms, bodies in the fire. Now, I'm gonna be level with you. This does kind of sound like something a wizard in a cave in like one of the Zelda games would tell you, but let me do my best to parse this. Some Nostradamus experts and translators believe that this could be a reference to the rise of the digital age. I know, but bear with me. The new sage with a lone brain sees it. By his disciples invited to be immortal could possibly be referring to, and I don't want to stroke his ego too much here by calling him a sage, stage, but Mark Zuckerberg's desire for the metaverse and his unwavering belief that that's the future of humanity, that we're all gonna strap ourselves into a VR headset and start living our new lives inside a digital realm that looks like Wii Sports Resort, where we'll all begin anew and leave our fleshy bodies behind. Perhaps this is what Bodies in the Fire is referring to. Now, this stuff all seems a little sci-fi still, but it's an interesting thing to ponder and think about as we're getting close to reality each day. Is this the end goal for humanity? To link us all up? To escape the weakness of our flesh and get plugged into the matrix, existing as bits and bytes forever? In the last few years, we've seen AI go from rudimentary chatbots to these impressive creation tools capable of generating things we wouldn't believe. Will we get to a point where an AI can mimic a human experience? Notable video game director Hideo Kojima firmly believes this, and in a December 2022 interview alluded to this, saying that he believes he'll continue making video games even after his own death because he will have scanned his brain, and an AI based off his thoughts and his works will continue on his legacy long after he's gone. A disciple invited to be immortal, and if there's any disciple, it's Hideo Kojima. Now, I don't know about you, but I kinda like this reality, and I hope we can stay in it just a little bit longer, but that's mostly because I'm bad with computers. Number 5. War. What is it good for? 7 months the Great War, people dead of evil doing. Ruin ever shall not fall to the king. Now, if you've watched any of our previous videos on Nostradamus and other end of the world prediction style videos, you know that Nostradamus and the other seers tended to keep their predictions pretty vague, but sometimes they spelled it out simple enough that even a simpleton like me can follow along. Nostradamus is predicting a big war, a great war even, in size, not in quality. I don't think there was ever a great war. If the quatrain is anything to go off of, Nostradamus predicts that the war will erupt across Europe and then ravage the countryside, while hopefully keeping the city of Rouen, France in a good spot, and will refuse to fall to the king. Now, that part is open to a little bit of interpretation, because really that could mean anything. Who could the king be referring to? Is it one particular world leader? One nation vying for power? Is it the Burger King mascot who's finally snapped and is on a warpath of world domination? He's easily the most unhinged and dangerous of all fast food mascots, and the one I would most expect to start a war. Now, this is obviously a delicate subject, but the current situations across Eastern Europe is already cause for enough alarm. A war that's got everybody on their toes and watching the news constantly. And I don't think anyone wants to see it develop further into a proverbial Great War. A 7-month Great War sounds like it'd be over in a flash, but I think the last thing anyone wants is a war that's over in a flash, knowing the nuclear-powered arsenals out there. Shorter war is not necessarily a good thing. Nuclear annihilation is kind of the last thing anybody needs out there. Hey, hope I'm not bumming you out too much, talking about global conflicts and possibly the end of the world. Let's talk about something fun, like our fun channel. We got all sorts of scary content of just about any topic you can think of. So click through, stay scared, but stay watching this video, because we got a whole lot more predictions left to go. Number 4, Mars and Elon Musk. Listen to this quatrain. The two contenders will unite together. When most others unite with Mars, the African leader is fearful and trembles. The dual alliance is separated by the fleet. This one seems too perfect, you know? Immediately as I read that quatrain, maybe you made the same connection too. Mars, African leader? Immediately coming to my mind is Elon Musk, the South African billionaire tycoon who currently owns Twitter and has been extremely outspoken about his desire to flee this planet and to become the king and colonize the red planet of Mars. But who are these two contenders that have to unite together? Could it be referring to global superpowers coming together for the future of humanity? Or is it Facebook and Twitter coming together and he's just looking to buy more social medias? Some professional followers of Nostradamus' work, such as Lori Reading, has argued in favor of this as well, arguing that this is referring to the billionaire's plans for galactic domination. Another quatrain seems almost connected with this line from another verse. Take a listen. The light of Mars shall go out. Could this be again a reference to the mission? A suggestion that perhaps this dream of Mars is just that, a foolish dream, and that a colony on Mars would fail in upon itself. It also links up bizarrely well with the Opportunity rover. If you remember that from a few years back, the little guy who was rolling around the surface of Mars, its last transmission was, "My battery is fading and I'm going dark," which is almost like directly saying a light of Mars is going out. This is actually starting to creep me out here. Nostradamus might have been magic just a little bit. Time will tell, obviously, if this one remains to be true, although after Twitter, I don't know. I'm not so sure. I don't know if I want to pay $8 a month to subscribe to Mars Blue for a checkmark. Number 3, more plague. Oh, that's the last thing any of us need. Well, take a listen to this doom prophecy. Near the gates and within 2 cities, there will be 2 scourges, the likes of which has never seen. Famine within plague, people put out by steel, crying to the great immortal God for relief. Well, this doesn't sound fun at all. I'm not sure anybody wants this. I'm pretty sure everyone watching this has experienced more than enough plagues to last us a lifetime. Of course, it's unfortunately kind of foolhardy to think that humanity will never experience another viral epidemic because, well, germs are always going to exist unless we eradicate them entirely. So all we can do is brace ourselves for the next one and hopefully learn from the past. I mean, that's why we're looking all the way back to an old French astronomer who was writing things in the 15th century, and the off chance that any of it might help us out. Well, he might be on the money with this one again, because recently in 2021, researchers in Siberia uncovered in a block of ice 33 strains of ancient novel viruses. Now, novel means that they haven't been discovered before, not that they're just kind of fun and no trivia. Personally, I would put them back in the iceberg, I think, and then I would put like a tarp or maybe some tape over it. I think we should just deal with that where it is, and we should not be bringing any ancient prehistoric viruses into today's times. I think I'm good. Now, what really concerns me about this quatrain is the picture that it paints. Near the gates and within 2 cities, the people will be put out by steel, crying to the great immortal God for relief. Oh, that's dramatic. Could this be a reference to some power taking out its own citizens? Armies firing at infected individuals? Now, it could be that, but it could also be possible that Nostradamus somehow had a powerful vision into the future, and he was just watching an episode of The Last of Us, and he was basing his predictions around that. Good on him for not spoiling that series for 500 years. Number 2, economic crisis. Take a listen to this. No abbots, monks, no novices to learn. Honey shall cost far more than candle wax. So high the price of wheat that man is stirred to eat his fellow man in despair. Now, I'm not an economist. I'm a YouTuber, sort of. But I don't need to be an economist to tell you that things have been getting pretty expensive and everyone's feeling their purse strings tighten up. I can't tell you how many times this week I've had pasta with no sauce for dinner. Admittedly, I don't buy a ton of honey or candle wax, so I can't really comment on how accurate that all is, but I can definitely tell you that my weekly groceries are getting a lot more expensive. The fear, of course, here is that I think eating your fellow man in despair really does not sound like the good option. Now, there are a couple different ways we could take this interpretation. We could take it very literally, suggesting that things are going to get so dire and so bad that we'll have so little food to go around that we're forced to consume one another to survive, which really doesn't sound pleasant. And while I'm talking, I'd just like to throw out here, I am way too stringy to be valuable as meat. I mean, look at me, I'm like a bird, I'm hollow, so I wouldn't make a good meal out of me at all, so don't even bother trying over here. Alternatively, it could be interpreted in a more esoteric way. And since he's an old astronomer, I'm sure he spoke esoterically most of the time. He could be referring to the idea of eating the rich. If people get so fed up with the costs of living on just about everything and decide to revolt and strike back at the people in charge, hoping to dismantle the systems in place, which, hey, funny enough, actually leads into a segue for my next point really well. It's almost like I set that up. Number 1, great discord. Take a listen. The trumpet shakes with great discord, an agreement broken, lifting the face to heaven. The bloody mouth will swim with blood, the face anointed with milk and honey lies on the ground. Like most of Nostradamus' writings, this one does sound a bit like it's the opening monologue to one of the Lord of the Rings movies, and wow, honey again. Honey was like a really serious cause of concern for this guy. I think he might not have been an astronomer. He might just have been a man who took his morning tea incredibly seriously. So besides crying over spilled milk and honey, what do our great Nostradamus experts have to say about this one? Was Nostradamus banned from his Discord server and writing against the tyrannical mods? Well, like all of the ones on this list, this unnerving prediction seems to suggest that dire violence will come to plague us, with unrest between the masses and classes leading to full-scale rebellion and riots. This little ditty seems to support that, with Nostradamus writing that sooner and later you will see great changes made, dreadful horrors and vengeances. Well, I support great changes, definitely. I'm a huge fan of great changes, but I am not so sure about dreadful horrors and vengeances. I feel like I've seen more than enough of those. The last few years have seen more civil unrest than ever. Like, this is the most upset I've seen people in my life, at least. With it seeming like that somewhere around the world there's a mass scale protest or riot every couple of weeks. You know, it's easy to flick on the news and you see that and wonder if eventually we're gonna hit a boiling point and we'll see some of those horrifying horrors and vengeances and all those mal thoughts that he was thinking up. And when it does, if we'll see some serious changes, or hey, at the very least, maybe some positive progress towards the price of honey, because apparently that's the most important cause in the world.
Number 5. Oh great, more viruses. Considering how ill-prepared we turned out to be for the last super virus that ravaged the world, the idea of more viruses in the future is somehow equal parts terrifying and exhausting. Baba Vanga actually predicts a few different viruses will come to light, but the soonest will not affect humans, though it is still disturbing. According to Baba, in 2023, birds will be subjected to a deadly virus that will transmit through both the air and contaminated water. It will spread incredibly fast, wiping out entire flocks in weeks and leaving many species of bird on the brink of extinction. Scientists will apparently scramble to try and find a cure for our avian friends, but the now common sight of a flock of birds flying through the air will become a distant memory. This doesn't directly affect humans, but considering how much chicken we as a species eat, this will be a tough loss if it comes to pass. The next virus Baba Vanga predicts will apparently take hold in 2088 and will be unlike anything we've ever seen. It won't cause humans to have trouble breathing or for their immune systems to be compromised, but will apparently cause people to age extremely rapidly, resulting in a young person in their 20s looking like a senior citizen within a few seconds. This virus will apparently be an issue for humanity for almost 10 years, when it is apparently exterminated in 2097. We will then apparently get a break from pandemics until the year 2256, when a rocket sent to explore the deepest parts of the cosmos will return to Earth carrying an intergalactic virus. Hopefully, this virus won't be too intense, as a universal cure for all diseases isn't predicted until the year 4304. Though by then, Baba Vanga says that humans will no longer live on Earth, but on Mars, so make of that what you will. Number 4. A dangerous bioweapon. In 1925, the Geneva Convention decided to ban the use of biological weapons in war, with all the countries making a promise to never, under any circumstances, develop, produce, stockpile, or otherwise acquire or retain microbial or other biological agents or toxins, whatever their origin or method of production, of types and in quantities that have no justification for prophylactic, protective, or other peaceful purposes. They also agreed not to develop weapons, equipment, or means of delivery designed to use such agents or toxins for hostile purposes, or in armed combat. For the most part, the countries of the world have stuck to this agreement, other than some outliers such as the Soviet Union and Iraq. Unfortunately, one of Baba Vanga's other predictions for 2023 says that a large country will begin testing a new bioweapon. She is sparse on the details, but if this is true, which of the large nations will be carrying out the test? Will it be Russia, the United States, China? Who? And what is the nature of this bioweapon? Does it contain lab-grown viruses that could wreak havoc on humanity, or some other deadly mutagen that could permanently alter the DNA of its victims? Although she has had a few predictions that came true, Baba Vanga also said that World War III would begin in 2010, and that by 2016, Europe would become an empty wasteland. So hopefully, this is one of the predictions that turns out to not be true, as the idea of chemical weapons being unleashed this year is simply too much for me to deal with on top of everything else going on. Number 3. A change in the Earth's orbit. There's a lot of wonderful things to like about the planet Earth. Lush fields, flowing water, and its orbit exactly where it should be, which is quite an underrated but fantastic trait of the big blue marble we call home. Baba Vanga made another worrying prediction about the state of the Earth for 2023. She predicted that somehow something is going to knock Earth off of its orbit forever. Now, it should go without saying that something knocking Earth off of its orbit would be very bad. If Earth somehow was thrown off its orbit by some terrible force, it would wreak incalculable havoc. Countries would be thrown into cycles of days and nights that would last not for hours, but for months at a time. Think of the damage that would be caused. Unending daylight would lead to mass sleep deprivation, global anxiety, as well as incalculable damage to our flora, fauna, and wildlife. Crops would be ravaged and burnt, leading to a global famine. Unending days would lead to temperatures doubling, melting the ice caps at an even faster rate than they already are. This would result in massively rising sea levels and the flooding of coastal cities. Unending night wouldn't be much better, as it would make things very cold, and plant life would have no way to achieve the necessary photosynthesis, resulting in crop failures and once again, countless deaths. Interestingly, this is a recognized phenomenon called a polar night, and there's a town in Norway that experiences something like this. In Tromsø, the sun doesn't rise from November to January. While this is fine for a Norwegian town, a polar night taking place in the bread bowl is a recipe for disaster, and that's not even mentioning how much easier that would make it for vampires to attack us. Number 2. A solar storm. With all the rather dire predictions made by Baba Vanga, it could be tempting to call her a pessimist. One of her more devastating predictions for the year ahead is that we will experience what is known as a solar storm. A solar storm refers to phenomena taking place on the surface of the sun, such as coronal mass ejections or solar flares. If one of these coronal mass ejections were to reach Earth, it would cause a geomagnetic storm that would have horrible consequences for our technology-reliant world. This kind of storm has happened before on Earth in 1859 in what has since been called the Carrington event, due to the work of astronomer Richard Carrington. It resulted in telegraph networks being knocked out, as well as people using electronics being electrocuted, and even some pretty nasty fires. But it would be much worse if it happened today. Imagine, if you will, a world where all of the technology you take for granted was suddenly fried and unusable. Suddenly, internet access and records would be lost. Communication systems that we have come to rely on to keep our world running would become useless blocks of dead machinery. A world of darkness where chaos reigns and the financial markets are suddenly put into a dramatic tailspin that we could not even begin to reverse the effects of for years. Think of the chaos that took place relatively recently in Texas when the power grid went down, and imagine what would happen if that took place all over the world. The effect of this happening now could be no less than the total collapse of modern society. This is one of the most plausible predictions made by Baba Vanga, as some scientists say that since this kind of solar activity has happened before, we are overdue for it to happen again, and that is a matter not of if, but rather of when it happens. Considering the disastrous global consequences of one of these severe solar storms, let us hope that Baba Vanga is incorrect in her prediction that this will happen in 2023. Number 1. An alien invasion. One of Baba Vanga's most surprising predictions for 2023 is that this is the year we will make contact with visitors from another world. Unfortunately for us, these visitors will apparently not be coming in peace. She says that aliens will attack the Earth, and that during their invasion, they will use technology in order to prevent us from using electricity for 3 days and 3 nights, and that the Earth will be plunged into total darkness, with neither the moon or the stars being visible. We've already gone over how reliant we are on technology in the previous entry, so imagine how difficult it would be for us to suddenly be thrown back to the Stone Age, and then have to try and fight an alien race who have extremely advanced technology, as well as a desire to kill us. Baba Vanga claims that this will not be the end of the species as a whole, and that 10,000 of us will survive. But considering that we currently have a planet-wide population of 7.8 billion people, 10,000 survivors indicates only a 1.28% survival rate, meaning that for all practical purposes, it would be the end of the world as we know it. Apparently, peace with extraterrestrials is something we will eventually achieve, as Baba Vanga predicts that in the year 2130, aliens will be helping us to construct underwater cities, which will manage to become autonomous by producing their own power and food by 2195. These underwater cities are even more impressive when you consider that Baba Vanga also predicts that the Earth will become dry and desertified by 2170. Baba Vanga also predicts that in the year 2288, humanity will discover time travel, and that this is when aliens and humans will make contact. Which is interesting, as she already said that the first contact in war with the aliens would happen 265 years prior. And if this is first contact, Who are the aliens helping us build the underwater cities on the dry desert planet of Earth 158 years earlier in 2130? Do all these contradictions have anything to do with the time travel we will discover? Truly, Baba Vanga gets more and more mysterious as time goes by.
Number 5. Realistic holograms. In the episode Holidays of Future Past, we get another glimpse into the future timeline of the Simpsons family. Bart is living in the refurbished Springfield Elementary, which is now low-income housing, meaning Bart is still under the thumb of Principal Skinner, who's now Landlord Skinner of the lofts at Springfield Elementary. A little side prediction, I absolutely think this is gonna happen. I definitely think people are gonna live in decommissioned schools. You know, we're not gonna need them anymore if we're all just downloading Wikipedia onto a USB into our consciousness. Okay, I'm getting sidetracked. Anyway, to pass the time, Bart is still into Itchy and Scratchy, except instead of watching it on TV, Bart watches it as a live projected hologram in front of him. Itchy and Scratchy then proceed to do exactly what they do best, which is scratch, bite, and inflict grievous bodily harm on one another, which then splatters all over the walls of Miss Krabappel's former classroom behind him. Now, hologram technology is already leaps and bounds, making incredible strides. I mean, in our lifetime, we've seen it go from science fiction to regular reality. The Tupac hologram blew our minds when we first saw it, still blows mine. We even saw Homer as a hologram actually making a surprise appearance at a Comic-Con a few years back with his father, Matt Groening. Now, the real development will be when we get holograms like shown in this episode, that you could interact with physically or could have an interaction with the environment around you, which I think is all kinds of scary. I mean, imagine if a hologram, digital light conjured, could touch you or grab you. Imagine the ramifications of that. Or don't, to be honest, because I actually don't really want to think about it. But if you do want something to think about, why not thinking about subscribing to Top 5 Scary? We got videos every single day for your viewing pleasure. Let's keep going. Number 4. Economic crash. Look, things aren't doing too great economy-wise lately. You tried to buy butter recently? A trip to the grocery store just isn't what it used to be. And maybe the Simpsons writing team knows more than they're letting on. In a recent-ish episode from the 24th season, Homer goes to prep school. Homer meets a new friend who's voiced by Tom Waits, bizarrely enough. The man overhears Homer at Moe's talking about how he doesn't think society could survive a collapse, and the man agrees with him and warns Homer that soon there'll be economic disaster, and the supermarkets will collapse, and the United States will come down with it. Homer insists that America can't fall because it's a strong empire like Rome. The man then pulls out an iPad and shows Homer an unspecified vague video with no dates that warn him of a vague impending apocalypse, which is more than enough to convince a simpleton like Homer to join their cult-like group of survivalist preppers, prepping for what they believe to be the inevitable collapse. Of course, this is a pretty real phenomenon. We all know about preppers by now. Preppers are a recognized group. There was that reality show for a while, so that's all very real. Whether or not there's an incoming collapse and the supermarkets will be empty and we'll all be raiding, who's to say? I'm not an economist, I'm a YouTube host, so all I can say is that I've noticed butter is a lot more expensive than they usually are. In the end, Homer inadvertently triggers an event that causes a collapse in Springfield, but to his and the preppers' dismay, Springfield bounces back like nothing happens. So maybe we don't need to be worried. You know, in the event of a societal shutdown, as long as we have each other and a couple people remember some good jokes from The Simpsons, I think we could survive an apocalypse together. Number 3. Cloning blues. The Simpsons heads towards the future fairly often in the modern seasons these days. I didn't know that. I guess once you've been on for 34 years, you're gonna have to start inching towards the future eventually. Now, in previous episodes set in the near future, like the classics Lisa's Wedding or Bart to the Future, they've been surprisingly bang on with their predictions. I'm sure we all know about they make a joke about President Trump in Bart to the Future, but also some pretty smaller stuff here and there, like FaceTime being the primary method of communicating in the future. Well, the 18th episode of season 25, Days of Future Future, takes us back to the future Simpsons timeline. The episode shows us a grim fate, Homer's death. The family is devastated until Homer is swiftly cloned and replaced, memories intact. Of course, Homer being Homer, this new Homer does not last very long, and his clones have to be replaced like batteries in a smoke detector, and he ends up going through Dr. Frink's entire supply of clone bodies in a matter of days. Eventually, Homer's consciousness is given over to a robotic body, kinda a la Westworld. Now, obviously this technology is pretty fantastical, and I would wager we're definitely a few years off, and at the very least before we'll see a human being stepping out of a test tube with their memories intact and ready to go face the world. But I think it's more likely coming soon than it is later. Number 2. Journey to Mars. Look, eventually we're gonna have to leave this planet behind, you know? It had a good run, can't deny that, but someday we gotta just move on, you know? It's the nature of humanity, exploring beyond on the final frontier. In the 16th episode of season 27, we get a possible glimpse into this, with the episode featuring Marge and Lisa volunteering to be some of humanity's first pioneers into space, volunteering to go live on Mars. In the episode, a private company called Exploration Inc. is projecting to send people into space to colonize the third rock from the sun by the year 2026 and are looking for the first colonists. Marge learns during the training period that much of the skills they're looking for are similar to housework, one of Marge's favorite activities, leading her to become the perfect candidate, irritating Lisa, who wanted to be the first person on Mars. In the end, the two of them end up living there by 2050. Now, in the real world, going to Mars is a massive goal for the private company SpaceX, the other company that the CEO of Twitter runs. In the past, they've speculated that they would have people reaching Mars by now, but have pushed back a bit on that deadline. Their most recent estimations claim that by 2029, SpaceX will be sending out the first manned flights to the Red Planet to check it out. Will we get there by then? Honestly, I can see it happening. I think that's another one where we're inching closer with each passing day. The only question now is who will get there first, us or the Simpsons in 2026. That's the deadline we've got to meet or beat. And number 1, zombies. This one honestly came up a lot more than I think it would as I was looking for Simpsons predictions. Somebody in the writer's room has a very firm belief that this is how society is going to end. Now, it could just be because The Walking Dead has been really popular for the last 10 years and we as a people love zombies in our pop culture, but it shows up enough times in Simpsons future episodes that I thought it was worth noting. It's worth noting in 2 different episodes on this list even. You know, the ones that give us a look into the Simpsons canon, they both reference a zombie apocalypse. In the ending of Homer Goes to Prep School, after Homer sees that society would survive a collapse, at the end of the episode we see a shot of a meteor with zombies coming to Springfield. In fact, it's almost lightly implied that in the Simpsons universe there was kind of a low-grade zombie apocalypse. Because then, in the episode Days of Future Future, zombies seem to be just part of society, with Lisa working at a soup kitchen looking after the undead. Is this a glimpse into a dark future? I honestly think the way they treat zombies in The Simpsons is more or less how we deal with zombies. I don't think we'd have a full-blown Walking Dead thing. Maybe that would happen for a couple of weeks, but honestly I think we just work around it. I think you'd see zombies working minimum wage jobs. I think they'd be Uber Eats couriers or just like hanging out on the streets. I'm not afraid of seeing a shell of someone's former self shambling around as a corpse. I hope The Simpsons never ends, if nothing else, so they can always be around to predict the future.
Number 5 on this list is better than human robots. Humans are far from perfect. I think we can all agree on that. But up to this point, there hasn't been a single other species as intelligent or capable as humans have been. That's why we have effectively taken over the whole planet and have become the dominant species. We may not stay dominant for much longer if robots can become better than us though. Best Life says, a more immediate concern that will only be exacerbated in the decades to come is the phasing out of jobs and entire industries as artificial intelligence makes them obsolete. If we do not act promptly in anticipation of job disruption, we could experience a social catastrophe on a scale not seen since the Great Depression, predict Rohit Talwar, Steve Wells, and Alexandra Whittington, leaders of Fast Future, a professional foresight firm. Governments could be caught out by the pace and scale of automation through robotics and AI to such an extent that a sudden surge in unemployment leaves significant numbers of people without work and without the funds to provide for their families. They predict that such a situation would lead to all sorts of collateral issues such as increasing social unrest, tension related to the income inequality, a rise in criminal behavior in order to meet basic needs, and potentially violent backlash against government leaders and authorities. Robots don't need to come in with futuristic weapons and kill us all to do some serious damage to humanity. Just by letting us further develop them and then implement them instead of human workers, that's gonna do enough damage. I've read extensively on this topic before, and it is literally already happening right now. People are losing their jobs left, right, and center because robots are just simply cheaper and more efficient. Sooner rather than later, there are gonna be too many people unemployed by this, and the whole thing is gonna come crashing down. We've just gotta hope that by that time, the robots aren't smart enough to take over either. Number 4 on this list is rigged elections. Now this is something that's been going on for time, but don't expect it to leave us anytime soon. Best Life says, as technology has made voting easier in some parts of the world, it's also made voting systems more vulnerable to attack, and these threats are only likely to grow, as we've seen in the efforts from Russians in the United States to most recent elections. Hacking an election in terms of changing actual votes is extremely risky for a nation state to do against the US, as it could lead to war, but for hacktivists and some organized crime groups, the risk may be worth it, says Jason Glassberg, co-founder of Casabas Security, a hacking firm that does extensive research and testing for the Internet of Things. At a minimum, expect to see ransomware and other cyber extortion targeting voting systems in the coming years. However, more dramatic attacks such as permanently crippling voting machines or forcing the machines to retabulate votes are also realistic. So it seems that rigged elections are only evolving and becoming trickier to detect, not leaving us behind like some would hope. We have this perception that our system is set in place and it's totally fair and democratic, but this just goes to show how off that perception is. So many factors that we don't know about go into an election, and our tiny little vote might not play that big of a role if some voting machine is casting millions for one candidate. It's all very slimy and sadly the reality of the world. Number 3 on this list is hijacked cities. So we don't live in Gotham and there's no evil Joker character coming to take over our town, so how would somebody hijack an entire city? Well, Best Life says, the dark side of our technological advancements is that we are also more vulnerable to attack. Glassberg points out to the recent ransomware attack on Atlanta that froze the city's systems, which eventually costed $2.6 million for emergency response. We can expect to see more attacks like this in the coming years, particularly as city and county governments run a number of critical services which are often insecure and increasingly connected to the internet, says Glassberg. Since it's proven difficult to stop and prosecute these attacks, especially when they use simple tactics like ransomware, this is a very realistic scenario in the coming years as more criminal groups will hijack public services in order to demand large ransoms. Having all our cities run through tech has made our cities very advanced, but it's also made them very exploitable. The Atlanta example proves that some guy with a supercomputer across the world could completely bring the city to its knees. The government has even included this idea in warfare and has full-on task forces designed to target tech and things of this nature. Expect a lot more attacks like this moving forward as our tech continues to develop. Number 2 on this list is digital Big Brother. I am a big fan of the show Big Brother, one of my favorite reality TV shows actually. Would I love to participate on that show? Absolutely I would. Do I want to be monitored every second of my life though? Absolutely not. Best Life says, as AI becomes increasingly sophisticated, we will inevitably start to see applications in the security domain developed without further programming by humans, according to the Fast Future team. Whilst not quite to the level of Skynet at the heart of the Terminator movie franchise, the machines promise to be far more sophisticated in their approach than humans and to develop more complex algorithms they predict. Consequently, such developments will severely challenge our ability to understand, monitor, intervene, make changes, and exert control over our digital security bots. They expect that the surveillance and control these bots will have over our lives could increasingly infringe on our freedoms, giving a sense that robot overlords are watching us. I already feel like a robot overlord is watching me. Like anytime I say something that rhymes with Alexa and then my Alexa robot turns on, I realize that I'm being listened to all the time. Or when I mention one thing in passing to a friend, like, I don't know, I say that I really want to go golfing sometime soon, and then the next thing that I see on my Instagram account is ads for golfing. This Big Brother mentality is already happening right now, and it really isn't nice. Apparently, this is only going to become more and more invasive as time goes on. We won't be able to go to the bathroom anymore without some robot knowing about it and storing that information somewhere. And finally, number 1 on this list is extinct species. This one is truly very sad, and it's something that has been going on for decades. Global warming is a disaster. It is a man-caused disaster that is slowly eating the world, and it's gaining speed. The ice caps are melting at unprecedented rates, and before we know it, they will be completely destroyed. Not only will that destroy the habitats of tons of creatures that live by the ice, but it will also destroy the habitats of creatures in the ocean and destroy our cities because the ocean level will rise enough to flood them. The next 50 years is absolutely critical when it comes to climate change, and many experts think that we've already passed the place of no return. It's currently estimated that 1 million species will go extinct by 2050, and there literally isn't anything that we can do about it at this point. Reversing the effects of climate change takes time, and what we do now, we will see those results in 50 years. That number of 1 million species will only continue to rise and rise if change isn't actively enforced, and honestly guys, we might be part of that 1 million species. Number 5 on this list is war. So this one's pretty general, but the Bible definitely touched on it quite a bit, so it feels fair to include it. Now, war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, "Now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come, for the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they loved not their lives even until death." Whew! What a mouthful, guys, but that is just one passage discussing war, but frankly, there are just so many of them. Sometimes they talk about specific wars being fought between certain groups, but a lot of the time it's just war in general. Sometimes it even discusses how God will be with you when you go to war, which is actually kind of an incentive to fight. This book and what it preaches has been the catalyst for so many battles in human history, and it's not unreasonable to think that it's going to happen again. I certainly hope that there is no more major wars in human history, and this predict isn't right, but I'm not going to be holding my breath. Number 4 on this list is the 7 bowls. Then I heard a loud voice from the temple telling the 7 angels, "Go and pour out onto earth the 7 bowls of the wrath of God." So the first angel went and poured out his bowl on the earth, and harmful and painful sores came upon the people who bore the mark of the beast and worshipped its image. The second angel poured out his bowl into the sea, and it became like the blood of a corpse, and every living thing died that was in the sea. The third angel poured out his bowl into the rivers and the springs of water, and they became blood. And I heard the angel in charge of the waters say, "Just are you, O Holy One, who is and who was, for you brought these judgments." That's a passage from the Bible, and those are only 3 of the bowls. There are literally 4 more of these things that get even worse. The 4th one causes the sun to burn people. The 5th one covers the world in darkness and has people bite their tongues off. The 6th one dries up a massive river, and the 7th one causes huge earthquakes. So not really the best of times if you ask me. Now let's be real folks, are all of these things gonna happen all at once? Probably not. But some of it definitely could. Is there a reality where I see all of the fish in the oceans getting poisoned by something and then ultimately destroying the worldwide ecosystem? Potentially. Could I see a massive earthquake ravaging parts of the world and causing a horrible chain reaction killing millions? Yeah, I mean, it could happen. All of these bowls are pretty horrible, and we just have to hope that none of these things happen to us now, because the ramifications, they'd be pretty catastrophic. Number 3 on this list is the persecution of Christians. Religion, although it can do great good, has also caused horrible evil. Throughout history, we can see that religion is basically the leading cause for humans to start fighting each other. What someone believes and the rules to which they govern their life is really important to us humans, and Christianity is no different. The Bible has talked a bunch about the persecution of Christians before. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed. Always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may be manifested in our bodies. For we who live are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus also may be manifested in our mortal flesh. So death is at work in us, but life in you. That's just one of the passages in the Bible talking about it, but we also have some other ones that are just straight to the point, reading, "Indeed, all who desire to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted." Now, Christians being persecuted is nothing new. This is a prediction that's actually already come to fruition many times over. Like I said before, religion has started many wars in the past, and the persecution of Christians has certainly been a reason for a couple of them. It's possible that this isn't actually done though. I'd like to believe that the world is getting to a place where one can believe what they choose to believe, and that's fine for them, but the fact of the matter is we just simply aren't there yet. There has always been and continues to be the persecution of not just Christians, but tons of groups with all different beliefs. It's sad to say, but this might not be over yet, and this prediction may continue to be proven correct. Number 2 on this list is famine. For probably most of the people watching this video, famine, or the thought of going hungry, most likely isn't that close to you. However, there are still millions of people in the world that suffer greatly from famine and die from it all the time. There will be great earthquakes and in various places famine and pestilences, and there will be terrors and great signs from heaven. Famine is mentioned a lot in the Bible, and I think it was probably a sign of the times. We have to remember that when the Bible was written, the world was not nearly as advanced as it is today. Food and water, basic resources for survival, were not a given by any means, but something that people had to fight for on the daily. If you had these resources in abundance, then that was considered a luxury and you were probably really wealthy. Even though we don't live in those times anymore, and now for a lot of people, water is at your nearest tap and food at your nearest supermarket, famine is still a real thing. It should also be noted that we should never take food for granted. Some experts are predicting that if global warming continues at the drastic rate that it's going, food will become far harder to grow and get a lot scarcer. Fingers crossed we can prevent this from happening and keep everybody well fed in the future. And finally, number 1 on this list is an asteroid. Listen to this passage from the Bible and tell me this isn't just a tad bit concerning. The first angel blew his trumpet, and there followed hail and fire mixed with blood, and these were thrown upon the earth. And a third of the earth was burned up, and a third of the trees were burned up, and all green grass was burned up. The second angel blew his trumpet, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, and a third of the sea became blood. A third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. The third angel blew his trumpet, and a great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood. A third of the waters became wormwood, and many people died from the water because it had been made bitter. So I don't know about you guys, but the prospect of getting hit with 3 separate asteroids really doesn't sound like a great time to me. The way that they describe it may be a bit tame too, to be honest. If we're gonna get hit with 3 separate things from space, then it's very likely that more than a third of the trees are gonna burn up. In fact, it would probably be the end of the world as we know it. I've done a lot of research on the possibility of an asteroid coming and crashing into the Earth, and it's a real concern. Luckily, scientists don't predict anything in the near future, but that doesn't mean that it still won't happen. In fact, statistically speaking, eventually it will happen. Whether we're ready for this impact or are capable of defending ourselves from it, that's another question entirely.
Number 5 on this list is Malthusianism. Malthusianism is an idea created by Thomas Robert Malthus that looks at the human population growth and its relationship to food consumption. The premise of the theory is reasonably simple. Basically, population growth will grow exponentially, but the production of food can only ever be linear. If the population grows exponentially and food production is linear, then there will eventually be a point reached where not everyone on the planet can get food. This is called the Malthusian catastrophe and the doomsday scenario that we're going to be looking at. Malthus writes about this extensively in his essay on the principle of population. Ever since he wrote about this theory, people have debated its validity for centuries, with scientists being on both sides of the argument. It's even led some extremists to rally for population control, basically meaning that we thin the herd so we never reach this world-ending scenario. There are some counter-arguments to Malthusianism, with the biggest one being human innovation. When Malthus lived, he never had the means of growing food like we have today, and our innovation continues to grow as time goes on. That being said, around 9 million people die from hunger every year, so I wouldn't be surprised if this catastrophe started to materialize in 2022. Now I should note that it wouldn't be an immediate thing where all of a sudden everyone is hungry. It would take years to see the full-scale effects of the population shaving itself off due to hunger. However, we've talked extensively about climate change on this channel before and the scary effects that it's currently having on the planet, and food is one of them. Climate change isn't making it any easier to grow food. In fact, the rising temperatures are making it far harder in some places. In the areas where it's already so hot to begin with, it's become increasingly more difficult to grow crops due to the lack of water. This is made to be an even bigger problem as well, because typically the places that are already hotter to begin with are the areas of the world that suffer from famine the most. All of this being said, our ability to grow food due to climate change is becoming harder. Our growth in population, though, isn't slowing down at all. If you take a look at any global population chart, then you will see that our growth is exactly as Malthus suggested. Exponential. It's very possible that 2022 is the year that we see the scales tip, and due to all these factors, enter into the Malthusian catastrophe. Number 4 on this list is an asteroid. The idea of an asteroid smashing into the Earth has been something explored in the media and pop culture pretty much ever since we realized that's what killed the dinosaurs. Now I shouldn't state that as fact because it isn't 100% confirmed, but that is most scientists' working theory right now. They believe that a celestial object crashed into the Earth and that caused the climate on our planet to change so dramatically that the dinosaur species couldn't survive any longer. David Morrison of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration's Ames Research Center talks about the impacts of an asteroid hitting Earth further, where he says, "The effects of an impact on the Earth depends critically on the size and hence the energy of the impact. For example, a comet less than 100 meters across will explode high in the atmosphere and probably do no harm whatsoever. If the comet is 10 kilometers across or larger," and then in brackets he says, "that is if the impact carries an energy of more than 100 million megatrons," and bracket, "the resulting global environmental damage will be so extensive that it will lead to a mass extinction in which most life forms will die. The environmental consequences of a giant impact take many forms. The worst effects come from a global firestorm ignited by backfalling impact debris and from global pall of darkness that lasts for many months due to the dust suspended in the stratosphere." So obviously an asteroid coming to Earth, if it was a large enough size, would be horrible and likely mean the end of all human life as we know it. As of right now though, we look to be in the clear because there hasn't been any reports from scientists detailing an asteroid that's on trajectory to Earth, but some people have conspiracy theories surrounding that. It's been speculated upon that even if scientists saw an asteroid was on its way to Earth, that this wouldn't be released to the public. Similar to how people think the government has covered up the existence of aliens, they also believe that a world-ending scenario like this would be swept under the rug as well. This is because mass chaos would ensue if we all knew that we were going to die. I tend to put my faith in science when it comes to stuff like this, but crazy things in the universe happen all the time, and an asteroid hitting us might just be one of them. Number 3 on this list is a solar shutdown. Back in the 1970s, the study of the galaxy and space was at the forefront of everyone's minds. We were learning a lot about our universe and how the laws of physics operate in space. We were also learning a lot about our sun, the most important thing to us in our living solar system. During this time though, we made an unsettling discovery about it, something that if proven true would end all life as we know it. This is called a solar shutdown. A solar shutdown is when a star, like our sun, doesn't operate at its full power, but its activity level drops. This activity level could drop as much as 40% compared to what it's doing now. The reason that they theorized this is because the sun wasn't emitting as many neutrinos, a particle associated with solar activity. As more research came out, paleontologists have found evidence that this happened roughly 650 million years ago in a period that they refer to as the snowball Earth. They call it snowball Earth because Earth was basically one big ball of ice. If the sun was to lose 40% of its power, then the oceans would all freeze over and all life on Earth would cease to exist. The problem is, there's no way we would ever be able to stop this or do anything about it. We also wouldn't know that it's happening until it's actually transpiring right in front of us because there's no way to predict it. The sun means literally everything to us, and a dip in its activity by just a little bit would mean our slow demise. We just gotta hope that 2022 isn't the year that it decides to slow down. Number 2 on this list is a massive cyber attack. Ever since the introduction of nuclear weapons, humans have always had those at the forefront of our minds when it comes to massive world-ending scenarios. However, we need to start shifting our thinking a little bit. A cyber attack could be just as deadly, if not more so, than a nuclear war, and it's honestly far more likely in my opinion. Since the beginning of the internet and online activity, the capability of someone being able to remotely hack into someone else's computer and steal information, that's all been possible. It's also possible to remotely hack into someone's computer and control things on said computer. This has happened many times in the past and on some extremely high profile companies too. For instance, in 1999, Jonathan James hacked into NASA and the US Defense Department. He was able to install a backdoor into the computers, which then gave him access to tons of classified information like passwords to military computers. The craziest part about all of this was that Jonathan was 15 years old when he did this. It's really not a reassuring thought when a 15-year-old is capable of hacking into NASA and the US Defense Department. If a terror group was to do something like this, then the power they could possess could be endless. They could remotely launch nuclear weapons at will. They could shut down power to everyone on the planet who might be on life support. They could honestly do almost anything they wanted and launch the world into a complete disaster. This is one of the ones on this list that I fear the most of all. We just have to hope that the firewalls of these high-profile companies are stronger than they were in 1999. Number 1 on this list is the equation. This entry is really interesting and something that's widely debated in the scientific community. Richard Gott III was an astrophysicist and is one of the founders of the equation that ultimately predicts when the human race will end. He first got enthralled about the idea of creating a math equation to predict the future when he did that very thing in terms of the Berlin Wall. He predicted that the Berlin Wall would fall within 2.5 and 24 years. He was correct, and it did in fact go down within that time frame. He then took the equation that he did that with, and along with some other physicists, attempted to apply the same equation to the existence of humans. The time frame isn't as long as we may hope though. In fact, this math equation gives even odds that the human race will no longer exist from right now until 760 years from now. So that means that next year is very much in the time frame that we could all die out. Now the way that this equation works, you don't actually know how the human race is going to end, just the time frame that it's going to happen. This is part of the reason why some other scientists have refuted this theory, because they believe that the equation can't possibly be correct if you have an unknown variable causing the actual extinction. As far as we're concerned, we kind of just need to hope that they're right and God was wrong, because even if next year isn't the one where it all comes crashing down, 760 years still isn't that much time left on the clock.